Recently, Attorney General Merrick Garland testified before the Republican-led House Judiciary Committee, and he was subjected to an onslaught of baseless accusations and histrionic rants from those MAGA cultists. Fortunately for him, Democratic Congressman and debate powerhouse Eric Swalwell was in the room, and he used his 5 minutes of speaking time to utterly crush their bad faith attacks and defend justice in the United States. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. Maybe check out my Patreon. I'd appreciate the support. All right, folks, so I'm beginning basically every video over the past 24 hours with this disclaimer. Even though I am vaxxed and boosted, for the first time in 3 years, I have contracted COVID. I tested positive a couple of days ago, and I'm still recovering. So if I sound strange or if I make any weird noises, I apologize in advance. Just please bear with me. So with that in mind, let's get to the politics. So Attorney General Merrick Garland had to testify before the House Judiciary Committee led by this guy here, a man we all know and loathe, Jim Jordan of Ohio, who is not a legislator. He is simply a culture warrior who's only good for gotchas, okay? And it went about as well as you expected. Merrick Garland, who is a very mild-mannered, educated, incredibly patient. He's like the Dr. Fauci of the Justice Department. He's just a chill guy, and Republicans hate him because they are desperate to find something to legitimize Donald Trump's baseless claims that the Biden Justice Department is weaponized against them. So he testified, I think, for like 3 or 4 hours, if I remember correctly. I watched like 3/4 of it, but it was very long, and it went about as well as you expected. But I want to draw your attention to the 5 minutes of speaking time from Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell, who ran for president. As you may or may not remember, he didn't do very well in 2020. Now, Eric Swalwell is an excellent debater. And over the past 3 years in particular, he has become more blunt. He has become more incisive. He's apparently reportedly had like nose-to-nose encounters with Kevin McCarthy where they've dropped the F-bombs at each other and threatened to beat each other up. So he is a fighter, okay? And as we've discussed, I like, and I'm sure you do as well, Democratic fighters, people who are willing to match Republican energy when and where appropriate. So we're going to play the full 5 minutes here, and this is probably going to be a long one, and we're going to break it up through commentary. I know some people in my comment section don't like the fact that I will interrupt the video with commentary, but this is a commentary channel, so if you want to watch the testimony uninterrupted, I would encourage you to do so as C-SPAN. So without further ado, Eric Swalwell.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Mr. Attorney General, my colleague just said that you should be held in contempt of Congress, and that is quite rich, because the guy who's leaving the hearing room right now, Mr. Jordan, is about 500 days into evading his subpoena.
So right there, Eric Swalwell brings the receipts, and he's talking to Jim Jordan's back because Jim Jordan, I don't know if he had to like schedule a bathroom break or what, but it's probably in Jim Jordan's best interest that he left the room because there's no way he would have been able to withstand the scrutiny. What he's talking about is when Democrats held the majority and they were doing the investigation into Donald Trump's attempted coup on January 6th, Jim Jordan is actually a material witness. Okay, he was in contact with Donald Trump in the lead up to January 6th, and there was a subpoena issued for Jim Jordan to testify, and he refused to comply with the subpoena. So the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, who was lecturing others about contempt of Congress, should have himself been held in contempt of Congress for refusing to comply with a congressional subpoena. So Eric Swalwell is smugly pointing that fact out.
About 500 days. So if we're going to talk about contempt of Congress, let's get real. I mean, are you serious that Jim Jordan, a witness to one of the greatest crimes ever committed in America, a crime where more prosecutions have occurred than any crime committed in America, refuses to help his country, and we're going to get lectured about subpoena compliance and contempt of Congress? Jim Jordan won't even honor a lawful subpoena? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? There's no credibility on that side. Mr. Attorney General, you are serious, they are not. You are decent, they are not. You are fair, they are not. So I welcome you to the law firm of Insurrection LLP, where they work every single day on behalf of one client, Donald Trump. And they do that at the expense of millions of Americans who need the government to stay open, who want their kids safe in their schools, and would like to see Ukraine stay in the fight so that we don't help Russia. That's the expense that this nonsense, this clown show, I'd call it a clown show, except they actually have real responsibilities that affect real Americans.
So again, before we go on, what a monologue so far. I mean, well said. He's right to call it out. He's right. I mean, he's not, dropping F-bombs or anything else, right? There's a limit to how far he's willing to breach decorum in public, but he's not mincing his words. Attorney General Garland is serious. They are not. Attorney General Garland is fair. If anything, you could actually easily make the argument that Attorney General Garland, as I have on this channel, it's one of my big complaints with the Attorney General, is he's so fair as to be unfair. He bends over backwards to accommodate the Republican Party, as we've discussed in previous videos, in order to basically try to bribe them. He's like, listen, I am so nonpartisan here. I am so non-biased. I am so not trying to weaponize the Department of Justice that I'll negotiate with Donald Trump for 2 years to turn over documents. I will, at the very last second, provide a special counsel or impose a special counsel to investigate Donald Trump. I will drag my feet on that. There's been an expose saying that Attorney General Garland basically squashed or sat on or slow-walked early attempts to investigate Donald Trump and his allies for their attempts to steal the election. Attorney General Garland is so eager to avoid the appearance of weaponizing the Department of Justice that you could easily make the argument he's gone in the opposite direction and made a political consideration to bend over backwards for Republicans, which is its own separate issue. But anyway, with that in mind, continue on.
It's the difference between one side that believes in governing and one side that believes in ruling. You've tried to comply with this committee. In fact, last week, one of your special agents came here for an interview, brought his lawyer, and was told that he couldn't have his lawyer present. Mr. Jordan, who tells all of us he knows so much about the Constitution, wouldn't afford one of your employees one of the basic constitutional rights to have a lawyer present. In fact, they threatened to call the Capitol Police and arrest a lawyer that was brought. Are you familiar with that standoff that occurred last week, Mr. Attorney General?
Generally, yes.
Well, your office also sent a letter detailing it, that you were willing to comply, but you'd like him to have a lawyer, and I'd like to submit that to the record with unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Who appointed Mr. Weiss?
Mr. Trump was the last.
Now, they're referring to, and this is really the thesis of the entire hearing, this is in the aftermath of David Weiss, who was a Trump-appointed United States attorney that Merrick Garland elevated to special counsel. He has now indicted Hunter Biden, President Biden's only surviving son. And in the aftermath of this, that's really what the prime theme, the prime thrust of this particular hearing is about, because Republicans are insinuating that somehow President Biden's Attorney General, Merrick Garland, was interfering, or that this is some sort of elaborate ploy to help President Biden, help Hunter Biden, by allowing a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney special counsel status to indict Hunter Biden, which he has done, even though Hunter Biden's dad is everybody's boss, the President of the United States. I'm not exactly sure how the conspiracy works, and I don't think Republicans are either, but that's the context. That's why Eric Swalwell is asking about who hired David Weiss. So we're going to go back to it.
Unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Who appointed Mr. Weiss?
Mr. Trump was the last person who appointed Mr. Weiss to the position of U.S. Attorney. I appointed him to the position of special counsel last month.
Who initially appointed John Durham?
John Durham being another special counsel who was appointed by Donald Trump, raised to the position of special counsel by Trump's Attorney General Bill Barr to investigate the investigation of the investigation into Donald Trump's connections with Russia.
Mr. Durham was, I believe, also appointed by President Trump, and Mr. Barr appointed him as special counsel.
And again, these guys are so upset that Donald Trump's appointed prosecutors aren't doing enough of the corruption that Donald Trump wants them to do. So either they are just following the law, or they're not as corrupt, and they're not willing to go as far as they think that Donald Trump deserves. That's what they're asking to happen here. Also, doesn't it seem that they want it both ways when it comes to the special counsel? A lot of questions suggested that the special counsel should be independent, but when they didn't like the direction of the special counsel, you were asked why you didn't interfere more or involve yourself more or investigate more. Did you get that sense that you're kind of stuck here?
So what they're talking about is the special counsel, David Weiss, who's investigating Hunter Biden. The Republicans are basically putting Merrick Garland in a no-win situation. They don't want him to interfere because he's President Biden's appointed attorney general. So you shouldn't interfere. You need to leave the special counsel alone. But then when they don't like what the special counsel does with Hunter Biden, then they're mad that Merrick Garland didn't intervene. So it's damned if you do, damned if you don't, a classic catch-22, because they're not operating in good faith. They don't want to create a path for mutual success or mutual acceptance. It's bad faith. It's literally no matter what Merrick Garland does, Republicans are upset because they have a particular preordained outcome in mind, and unless, Merrick Garland supports it, then he's complicit in any wrongdoing, no matter what he does.
When I make an appointment, somebody be special counsel or prosecutor, the appointment is without respect to what the outcomes of the case will be.
Your office has made a number of reforms to 702, targeting foreign nationals, but those reforms have not been put into law. 702 is also one of the best weapons we have to go after fentanyl. Can you tell us if you would support putting some of those reforms into law so we don't have to live administration to administration to see if they're going to be followed?
I would. Section 702 provides us with the greatest amount, at least the Justice Department, every morning, the greatest amount of intelligence that we receive about dangerous threats to the United States.
From foreign nationals? From
foreign nationals. I am quite aware and sensitive to civil liberties concerns with respect to the queries. And for that reason, I put into place and I extended some of those that Mr. Barr had begun at the end of his term, and I put further ones in place. Those have led to a dramatic reduction in the number of queries and a dramatic reduction in the number of non-compliant queries. I believe those are appropriate reforms, and I would be in favor of codifying them, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General, and thank you for coming and doing something that the chairman is unwilling to do, testify to Congress.
Well said, Eric Swalwell. So that particular part at the end, of course, there is a fentanyl crisis here in the United States. This is something that is bipartisanly accepted. Now, to the extent that fentanyl is coming across the border, that's also under the purview of the Department of Homeland Security, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas. He also has responsibility for trying to manage the situation, so it's not just Attorney General Merrick Garland, but he's talking about how, these are bipartisan efforts that he's taken towards addressing the situation with fentanyl, and that he wants to take even more steps towards codifying them. Now, all in all, this is what Eric Swalwell did in 5 minutes is rebuke and refute the vast majority of the bad faith attacks that Merrick Garland endured for 3 hours, basically, collectively, because in many cases, none of them were new. They were repetitive, right? It was the same situation. You're protecting Hunter Biden by allowing him to be investigated, by allowing the investigator to be appointed special counsel, giving him more authority and power and privilege to make prosecutions. He is prosecuted, but you're protecting him somehow because the guy that we said previously we did like because he was Trump appointed and he was investigating Hunter Biden under Trump, well, we don't like him anymore, even though we wanted him to stay on. And actually, 6 months ago, a year ago, we were upset that you didn't make him special counsel already. Well, now you have made him special counsel, and we're upset about that too. And yes, we were happy when you promised that you wouldn't interfere in investigations, particularly sensitive investigations like this one into the president's son. But now we're mad that you didn't do that you didn't interfere because you shouldn't have allowed David Weiss to be appointed special counsel in the first place. it's just this non-falsifiable mess because, again, they're acting in bad faith. They don't care. Basically, short of Merrick Garland condemning President Biden, announcing more investigations into President Biden, which, by the way, under Attorney General Garland, President Biden is being investigated for the retention of classified documents. People forgot about that. A Republican special counsel, I think his name was Robert Hur, is still investigating President Biden. Merrick Garland is investigating President Biden, his boss, and President Biden's only surviving son, Hunter. What more do they want? Well, we know what they would want. They want Merrick Garland to, I don't know, rebuke Joe Biden, to, encourage David Weiss, recommend the death penalty probably for Hunter Biden. Who knows? But it is the very embodiment of bad faith. There is no scenario, there's no process by which Republicans would accept the outcome unless it involves President Biden being impeached and indicted and prosecuted and convicted and jailed, and the same thing with Hunter. It doesn't matter. They only care about a particular outcome, no process, and they will not accept any timeline in which another outcome occurs. It's the very embodiment of bad faith attacks, and Eric Swalwell does a phenomenal job of crushing them in 5 minutes.